very early days, I would walk some distance to be picked up, and we'd go to another community to play hockey, an outdoor rink, low-hanging lights, and that's where it started. And even my first hockey game in Altona was an outdoor arena. But then 1950, they built a closed-in rink and played there ever after that. Oh, probably 9 or 10 years old, we skated on the pond or dugout that froze over. So, and then we also played a lot of horse puck hockey, I think, because we didn't have skates. A lot of time we just, if there's a smooth surface, then we'd knock around just like they do on the driveways now. So, equipment was cheap, obviously. A pair of Bauer skates were $18, $19, and the interesting part was, because I played goal, generally there wasn't great goal equipment around, so you had to sort of scrounge that up or buy it yourself, and so, but we managed. I mean, I played, when I played goal for the Maroons in the Southeastern League, we didn't wear masks, and neither did I, and so that's how we started. We had a coach by the name of Pete Pisnock, who we brought in from Winnipeg, and the best coach that the Altona Maroons had was Harry Salkers. Also, he was a market gardener from North Kildonan, and he would move down to Altona for the winter, and he brought our organization into a process where we had actual systems, and he then also coached little kids and set up a minor hockey program and developed into hockey schools and that whole process. And the things that sort of he put in place in the 50s, are still continuing today. So that's sort of one of the things that made the most sense for our organization. When I was playing for the Altona Maroons originally, I would play against Jimmy McFadden, Tom Rocky, Jimmy Moore out of Pilot Mound, Doug Collins, and some of those fellows had NHL experience, and so it was a neat experience to do that. Oh, for sure. The rivalries in those days were between Altona and Winkler were quite fierce, and in those days there wasn't much else going, so when there was a hockey game, the arenas were full, and there was also rivalries in those days between Altona and St. Jean. I remember one playoff series with St. Jean. We went 7 games, and we had an arena that packed in 2,000 people, with no seats. I mean, this was all standing room, and so that was a lot of people in a small town arena. I mean, there were old rinks. Pilot Mound had an old rink. Carmen had an old rink. Certainly the Altona rink at that time was, well, we thought was generally quite new, but in this day it was old. And they've pretty much all been replaced. Morden had an old rink. And for some years we played in Oakville, and they certainly had an old rink as well. And Oakville had a lot of former Portage Terrier junior players playing there, and so they usually had a very strong team. I think probably our own was probably what we enjoyed most, because it was generally brighter, and so I think we enjoyed it there most. It was built in the 50s, early in 1950, and the first season was 1951 when we played in it. I mean, it was adequate at the time, but originally it had a little lean-to waiting room where you got your skates on, and later on there was an actual waiting room and dressing rooms added, And then we were also one of the first teams to put in artificial ice, because in those days, many times the last few games in a playoff series would be very slushy. And one playoff series we actually finished in Winnipeg because the ice was all turned to mush out in the country. So then we set about building artificial ice plant in our arena, and nobody seemed to think that this was affordable. And so I was running the Maroons at the time, and so we needed to raise a certain amount of money to do this. And so the town wouldn't do it. So I went and got 25 businesses to sign a note at the bank guaranteeing the loan that we made, and we put in artificial ice. I mostly was already involved with playing or managing when I was watching a lot of hockey, because prior to that, I was on the farm. So my early recollection is listening Saturday night to Foster Hewitt, and that's on the farm. We got electricity in 1948, and that's when we got a radio, and I followed NHL hockey ever since. Well, I played with the Altona Maroons in the Southeastern Hockey League. Well, originally I was a backup goalkeeper for the Maroons, and I really didn't expect to play because they had a pretty good goalkeeper, but he also had some difficulty with a little too much beer. And one evening, I was minding my own business, and the fellows running the team at the time said, today you're playing because the other guy wasn't sober. So that's how I got into the first game. And so, but I don't particularly remember the first game. No, just sort of just evolved. The caliber it's hard to say what the caliber was like. It was very competitive, and the equipment was not as good, obviously, because, as I said before, we weren't wearing helmets. None of the players wore helmets. And, so the style was different, but it was always very competitive, and the rivalry between the communities was intense. So it was a lot of fun, and the communities really got behind you. Players like returning pros like Jimmy McFadden, those were always impressive. Tom Rocky, who had a few games with the Montreal Canadiens, came back to play, and he was very impressive. He was also later a coach. And there were Collins brothers from Pilot Mound that were impressive. Jim Moore was a very impressive. There was a fellow by the name of Black who played for the Pilot Mound Pilots, had only one eye. He had gone to semi-pro and got hurt. And it's amazing what he could do, having vision only on one eye. So those are the kind of things I remember. Not during my playing career, but during my managing career, the Maroons won a lot of titles, yes. The most memorable playing moment was after I had retired playing and was just managing the Maroons. And one night we were playing the Miami Rockets, and Jimmy Mutchison was their goalkeeper. He was coming in from Winnipeg. For some reason, he didn't make it. And so, the arena is full of fans, and so I go to the Miami dressing room and say, what's taking you guys so long? And so Jimmy McFadden was then playing. He says, we have no goalkeeper. So in those days, you didn't carry a backup. So he says, we have no goalkeeper. I said, we got to do something. We have a full house here. He says, well, we have an idea. You play for us. So, okay, so I put on the pads, played for the Miami Rockets that day against the Altona Maroons. And as a Miami goalkeeper that day, we lost. Miami lost 3-2 to the Maroons, but we almost knocked the Maroons off that day. So that was an interesting and most memorable event for me, because it was interesting for the crowd to get involved with that game then, because for me to be in the other end of the nets was sort of a unique thing. But that was the most interesting event that took place. For many years it was the Winkler Royals, but then later it was the Morden Bombers, which were the real rivals, and that created a lot of heat, and those are still rivals to this day, really. And then for a number of years it was the Oakville Seals, because and also the Carmen Beavers. So the Maroons had many. There was a string of years where the final series always went 7 games, and occasionally to 8, because there was a time where the league decided the series would be decided by points, not by games. And so, there was a tie. They would only play 1 period, and then so there was a couple of series that actually went to 8 games. So those were exciting times, and a lot of hate was generated between the communities. To move into another level, no, I never had that, because by and large our team was made up of men that were working, had jobs, and in some cases kids in grade 12. So it was more something we enjoyed doing, and we were happy to be able to do it locally. And so the idea of, should we go somewhere else, I think that wasn't on our radar. It came about because whoever, the fellows that were on the club executive at the time said, would I be interested in doing this and doing that, and so I did some nominal jobs for the executive, and then before I knew it, they said, well, you should be on the executive, and then before I knew it, then I was running the executive and the team, and so it sort of just progressed relatively quickly, and before I knew it, I was it. And as I say, I enjoyed it, and I could sort of keep things together, and I could gather players if we needed players from different areas, and so that's how that worked. The CFAM went on the air in 1957, and shortly thereafter we started to do play-by-play. We did Saturday night play-by-play for many, many years, and in the last number of years we've actually picked it up again to do the playoffs, play-by-play. So, and one of our stations actually also carries the Winkler Flyers play-by-play all games, and another of our stations in Portage carries the Portage Terry game. So we as a radio organization, we're involved with a lot of hockey teams. Our Steinbach station covers the Pistons, and then we have stations in Saskatchewan. So we're part of the Red Wings in Weyburn, the Bruins in Estevan, the Warriors in Moose Jaw, the Broncos in Swift Current, and the Blades in Saskatoon. So we're sort of involved with all of the hockey across the prairies. The benefits, well, first of all, we thought as a radio station we should do this because a lot of people from outlying areas weren't getting to the games. We thought it would also promote the league in general, which it did. And as a radio station, we could make a few bucks. And so later on, some teams didn't want us to broadcast from their arenas. They thought that would keep fans away, but that never does. I mean, you just create more excitement, and so by and large, we were only serving those people that you were either shut in or couldn't get there. So, but what we found it a good experience. Well, I think from the Maroons' standpoint, the operation was a success if we could keep going. And the Maroons are the only charter member of the Southeastern League that have been in it every year. I mean, Morden left for a few years, came back. Carmen left, came back. Winkler left for many years and came back last year. So the Maroons are the only ones that have been there continually. And we think it has been very good for the community. Youngsters want to be part of the Maroons. The Maroons organize hockey schools for kids, so that you have young kids wanting to wear maroon jerseys and maroon colors, and they want to be part of that process. And so that makes the community proud of the organization, and so that's sort of how we managed to keep it going. Well, and not just the Maroons, but all hockey teams, with the exception of maybe the pros, have to raise money constantly. And so that, again, was part of the mantra for the Maroons. They were raising money during the summer, during the off-season, so that you could be sustainable, because the gate receipts don't sustain any of these organizations. So you have to have backers, and you have to raise money in the off-season. And we could do that relatively easily because the community was totally behind us. So there were a few years when we couldn't pay our bills at the end of the season. We went to the merchants and said, we'll pay you, but we can't now. We'll have to sort of give us some time. And they did, and we had some fundraisers and that kind of stuff, and then cleared off. So we always knew we had the community behind us if we did the right thing, and that was, by and large, the Maroons tried to develop local players as much as possible, and to give back to the community, to work with the younger kids. And the community saw that, and so, as I say, to this day, they're doing well, and they're well respected in the community, and I think the Maroons have one of the best reputations in the league. So pretty much locally, from Altona and surrounding villages, there were Gretna, Rosenfeld, Hauptstadt, Sommerfeld, Plum Coulee, all of those communities would feed in players, and so and we went to great lengths to try and have that relationship so that they would gravitate to our community, and that worked. Well, for sure. We had a lot of issues. As I said earlier, we had import rules, so and there were usually teams that would try to circumvent the import rules, and so there was times when we were making decisions that weren't very well received, but you still had to do it. And for many years, there was a league executive that sort of ran the league as a sort of a triumvirate, so I think 3 or 4 people. And it was always a debate. Well, this player is ineligible, but if this member from this team was on the executive, well, then there was pressure to make him eligible, that kind of thing. And so one year I said I would continue to be president or commissioner if I would just make the decisions myself, and we wouldn't have committees. And they agreed to do that, and then I think I continued to run the league for another 15 years like that. And they obviously were happy that it was fair, because they kept putting me in there. So, the Maroons would say that most of the decisions that I made went against them, but I would think that I would do it on a fair basis. And in hindsight, they won't say that, but the fact that it still exists, that has maintained year after year, and that many of the original teams have come back, and I think it's the longest running league in Manitoba. that I know of, and so that's, I guess, the biggest. I would be proud of that we could achieve that. The lows in Altona was one year when we just couldn't seem to get enough players together, and I know one night we went out with 10 players on a road trip to Miami, and that's tough because they get pretty tired and beat up after the second period. And it sort of was at that time that we said we had to do something that would develop a stream of players coming up, and that's when we developed the hockey school idea, where we just worked early in fall and got all the kids to register for hockey school, and Harry Salkers would teach them the basics and the discipline and all of that. And after that process, there was never really a shortage of players. So that's sort of how that worked. Probably somebody like Wayne Stephenson, Harry Buchert, Jerry Rempel would certainly be one with a lot of talent. Mike Kaler was another really talented player. Doug Collins from Pilot Mound, Warren Brown, Harold Reimer from Winkler, and the Mutchison boys from Morden. These were all very talented players. And Billy North from Carmen. And two fellas that stand out in my mind to this day are Glennis and Gladwin Scott. I'm sure you know them, and so they were great competitors and great friends. So. Jimmy Moore from Pilot Mound was a very tough competitor. Harold Reimer, Winkler was very tough. For the Maroons, Jack Penner was probably as tough as anyone that I've seen. And usually the Oakville Seals had some very tough competitors. So. Jake Penner would be one from the Winkler Royals, certainly. Pete Pesnock from the Altona Maroons would be a character who was really off the wall. He was a defenseman. In those days, he would play 60 minutes, and he would get the occasional penalty box. And in one arena, the penalty box door, in most cases, I think they swing in. But he wouldn't. I mean, he just came out of the penalty box, took the whole door off, and they had to delay the game to try and put it back together. But he was coming out, and that door was flying. So those kind of things. But I mentioned earlier Jerry Rempel and Mike Kaler. These were very talented players that I watched growing up from little kids, and but there were a lot of when I think back, there would be a lot of favorites that I mean, Menno Dick was would be one of those. John Gerbrand, Menno Friesen, Harry Salkers. Wilbur Funk, who was recently inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame as an umpire, and he would be maybe one of the flaky ones that you would have wanted me to talk about before, but effective. And so these would be people that I remember to this day as being solid core hockey players for us. Well, the equipment, certainly the equipment has made the game totally different. And I think also there aren't, in many cases, the players don't want to compete at the same level. And so there are a lot of good hockey players in southern Manitoba that aren't playing hockey because for a variety of reasons they want to do other things. I mean, they either are raising families or are working at careers, so they don't want to sort of take the chance of getting beat up or hurt in the same way that maybe we did in our day. And so there's maybe less commitment at that level to sort of to play at that competitive level. You have to take time to practice and travel and all of that, and so that takes a chunk of time out of the winter. A lot of folks like to have winter holiday nowadays, and in our days when we were playing hockey, there wasn't a winter holiday. I mean, you played hockey all winter. You didn't sort of go away for a few weeks in the middle of the season, and so those kind of things I think are different. And but it's another era. It's like somebody says, well, could the Blackhawks of today beat the Red Wings of the 50s? Well, there's no way you know that because everything is different, and whether the greats of the 50s would be able to compete today, I mean, nobody knows that. So we all have in our minds opinions, but that's what they are, opinions.